Hi everyone and welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening as we launch a new book, Andrew McNeillie's new and collected poems, Striking a Match in a Storm. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited that we're launching this book together tonight. Andrew is joined this evening by Alan Riach, and I'm going to hand over in just a moment to them, but first I'll just run over some housekeeping things with you. So tonight the event's going to last about an hour. I can see some of you have found the chat box. Please do find the chat, get your messages in there, let us know where you're watching from, what you think of the reading, what you think of the launch. We'd love to get you involved in the conversation. As part of the event, Andrew is going to read some of the poems, and while he's reading, I'll have the text up on screen for you as a visual guide. You're in control of your screen, so if it doesn't suit you, please just have a play around and see if you can get it to suit your needs. If you have any technical problems, pop them in the chat and we'll do our best to help you throughout the event. Later on in the event, Andrew and Alan are going to have a bit of a conversation about the book and the poetry. We would really like you to get involved with that conversation as well. So there's a separate button which says Q&A. If you could get your questions lined up for Andrew, that would be great, and Alan can put them to him later on in the event. While you're using the chat, this one is annoying, but it's really useful if you all do it. While you're using the chat, please can you make sure that you select the option for everyone instead of hosts and panelists, because everyone won't be able to see your message if you don't select everyone. So please make sure that you select that before you use the chat box for us. So I think that's everything really. I'm very happy that we're joined this evening by Alan Riach, who is Professor of Scottish Literature at the University of Glasgow. He's kindly agreed to come and host this event with us tonight. So I am very pleased to invite him on screen to join me, and we'll begin the event.
Hello, good evening and welcome to this very special event, and I'm very pleased and privileged beyond the cliches to be doing this. As Jazz just said, my name's Alan Riach. I'm Professor of Scottish Literature at the University of Glasgow, and as was outlined, we'll have my introduction, then I'll hand on to Andrew to read poems and introduce them and get a sampling and a savouring of this fantastic new book, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers and open the conversation a wee bit. So we're on a kind of voyage where the destination might be assured, but the currents remain to be sailed with. We'll see where we go. Andrew McNeillie was born in North Wales, but one nation is never enough. Scotland, where his father and family came from, Wales, Ireland, where he spent a really formative year in the late 1960s, and England, where he's been long resident. All these nations and their regions and their territories generate in poetry not so much perhaps landscapes as haunts, hauntings, habitations and mysteries of presence and loss. And reading Andrew's poems, there's that sense delivered of layered realities, the transparencies through which the depths can be seen in their strata, or as Hugh McDermott puts it, through from the first to the last crusta. And the clarity of vision Andrew brings to his poetry, he brings to the perception in his language. He read English at Oxford and later became the literature editor of Oxford University Press, and later still a professor at the University of Exeter, where I remember working as an external examiner for his courses, particularly on writing and place, which involved actual excursions into the territories that the students might never have been completely familiar with at all. I remember feeling at that time that whatever the quality of the writing the students came up with, there was always the sense that their engagement was evident in everything I read. And partly that's the generation of that dynamic came from Andrew's vision, I think. They were the students, his students, were seeing the landscape in new ways, invaluable for new writers. Andrew's collections that are brought together in this new volume, Nevermore, Now Then, Slower, Immortal Memory, and Winter Moorings, combined with his memoir, which I should recommend, and Aaron Keening, about that formative stay on Inishmore, just short of a year through 1968 to 69. Adam Nicholson chose it as his book of the year for 2002, writing, "I enjoyed nothing more this year than an Aaron Keening. It's soft, sharp, funny, and often heart-wrenchingly nostalgic of that time that he spent there." And Tim Robinson, one of the guiding lights, one of the coordinate points of the magazine Archipelago, I'll mention in a moment. In the Irish Times, Tim Robinson noted that McNeillie's prose can be as pristine and effervescent as the sea's edge on a summer beach. And I would add, his poetry can be as severe and forbidding, and also as welcoming and freshening as that sea on the beach. As founder and publisher of Carcanet Press, Andrew's writers include Seamus Heaney and Tom Collin, but he has never been shy of backing his own preferences beyond fashion and fame. And he has always had the courage of his prejudices. The poems, then, sometimes brief, aphoristic, observational. Sometimes you find the exactness of moral precision. And sometimes he takes you with him on extended journey poems or gives you portraits of individuals, some famous, some less so. But always there's the metaphor of voyaging, which extends into his captaincy of the periodical Archipelago over 12 issues from 2007 to 2019. A sampler, edited by Fiona Stafford and Nicholas Allen, was produced last year in this hefty volume, which accompanies the collected poems. I would recommend as a complementary volume. And it's delightful to note that the second series was launched only a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago. Archipelago 2.1 is now at sea, is now on its way. For the whole first run of the first 12 issues, that first run of Archipelago was one epic voyage in itself, and now we're embarked on another. So, as a master mariner of poetry and a man whose knowledge of the oceans and ecologies of literature and nature is, I would say, second to none, there's nobody writing today whose work I would want to pay more attention to than him. Every issue of the magazine I found myself reading cover to cover. Can't say that about all magazines, because of the intrinsic value of what I found there. But every one of his poems gives me a more personal sense of discovery, a kind of validation, and the virtues of confident uncertainty in the knowable and unknowable world. If voyaging is one metaphor and an actuality, so is home and homecoming. And Andrew suggested that I might end my introduction by reading a very short poem of his, which I've always felt soon from the moment I read it, just as from the moment I met Andrew, recognizing that the quality was there. There was something inescapable, unavoidable, intrinsic about this quality. And the poem itself, I think, is one of his best. Cynefin. Cynefin is a Welsh word for home or habitat. And the poem is just one of the fifth of the sequence called Glendower Sonnets. And I just want to read that for this first one. Cynefin lost. What is another language? Not just words and rules you don't know, but concepts too, for feelings and ideas you never knew or thought to name. Like a poem that floods its lines with light, as in the fabled origin of life, escaping paraphrase. So living in that country always was mysterious and never to be equaled. For example, tell me in a word how you'd express a sense of being that embraces belonging here and now, in the landscape of your birth and death, its light and air and past at once, and what cause you might have to give it breath. All of the poems in this book are wonderful, but for me, that one takes the whole book into a realm of intensity and appropriateness, which I think we're going to explore now with the man himself. I'm going to hand over to Andrew to introduce and to read a selection of his poems from the new book. Andrew, would you like to come into the company?
Yes, thank you very much, Alan. That's really wonderful. It'll be downhill all the way now. I'm absolutely delighted to have this book, of course, and I quickly want to thank Michael Schmidt, who has been it was his idea that this should happen, and he's always been a great stalwart. The last time I saw him, I managed in an extravagant gesture to sweep a full bottle of red wine over his shirt front over supper in Oxford. And I haven't seen him since, but I know that I shall be wearing a white shirt when I see him next, and I expect him to reciprocate. I would love to see him. And all of you people at Carcanet have been fantastic. Now, I will begin to try to follow Alan with a selection of the poems. And the first that I'm going to read is a two-liner, the one that gives the book its title and speaks to the 24/7 cacophony of the digital era. A poet, 21st century. A redundant lighthouse keeper, striking a match in a storm. And so the next poem that I will read is a Welsh blackbird. It's a very, very early poem. I don't know, really early, and I included it in the sequence that I call Plato's Aviary, a set of poems about birds that appeared in my first book, Nevermore. I'd call your attention to an epigraph in this book from Hugh MacDiarmid's great poem By Wauchope's Side, which has the lines, "Late sang the blackie, but it stopped at last. The river still gaed singing past." Now that poem I didn't know when I wrote this poem, but blackies always affect me deeply, and Hugh MacDiarmid's very much so. I'm reading it for John Purser on the Isle of Skye and Anthony Farrell in Dublin, both of whom seem to like it. Aderin di, blackbird, Turdus merula, in memory of Hughie Bach. No more a soul of fixed abode, missing, though seen upon the road. The low road, high in blowing weather, the low road to the racing river, ardent for nothing but his loss. Bare branches and wild sky, God bless, tenebrous blackbird on the gusting air, where October's river, hole in corner, digs deep to drown the depths of winter and sings its own intoxicating song. His warning spills out hurriedly, as if he has withdrawal jitters from the demon drink. Alarmed again, he scolds away to skulk through shadow on shadow along the memory of spring. And now we move on to another Welsh poem called Dilyn. Dilyn means the Black Lake. It's to be found in northeastern Snowdonia, some way below 2,000 feet above sea level. A very hard place to get to. and very arduous to spend time in. It's a kind of cauldron lake with huge cliffs rising above it. You can't walk all the way around it because for about a quarter to a third of its circumference, the cliffs tumble straight down and dive straight down into the lake to the depth of about 160 feet. And all around it are kind of volcanic boulders that you have to struggle round. It's an impossible place. And my father and his cronies, two cronies, were addicted to going there above all other venues for trying to catch trout. And I was taken there as a 10-year-old boy first, and I had just passed the 11 plus when I was 10, which was a miracle. And I was given a fly fishing rod in return, which was called Scotia, which I particularly liked. And so I went with these men who paid me no heed at all and treated me as if I was another man into this very difficult place to learn how to catch trout with a fly. It's the base for me. It's where I'm imprinted, how I was imprinted on the wilderness, and how it came always to be the kind of place I sought and wanted to be in, and still do. And there's an expression that's not in this poem that I feel is fitting. It's called "Time alone will tell." The double meaning in that is something that I like to nurse to myself. Now I'm reading this poem for my daughter, especially for her. Gail, she has made a remarkable and treasured painting of the Black Lake, which hangs in our living room. Dylan, in memory of Trevor and Ivor and John. To fish there you wade in air among the rocks, angling for your balance. Black water chops ashore, and a torrent holds you, bubble-wrapped in its sound warp, like a dipper submerged in a rushing pool, intent on caddis larvae. If one of the others came by to know your luck, he could startle you to death. Ghosts as they are, or not, they haunt here, like the stories they told of ones that got away. The steep cum will catch or cast more than ever those wily fish might rise before you to a hook ripped of its barb on a rock. I learnt in this place, from the age of 10, to curse like a man, God damn it to hell, to brew tea in a smoke of heather stalks and downfall, to tie instant blood knots and a noose round the neck of the bloody butcher, while the fish moved out of range, as now that world has veered forever, and every finger's a thumb, my reading glasses beaded with rain, and not a fish to consume. The next poem is called Welsh Interval, and it's set at Penmon Point. Penmon stands on the northeast point of Anglesey. It actually means the point of Anglesey. Morn is Anglesey. Pen is head or point. It is the site of a circa 12th century monastery. Just across a narrow strait from it lies Uniserial, or Puffin Island. On a skerry in the strait stands through the Black Point Lighthouse. It has a bell that tolls every 30 seconds, day and night, and has done since 1922, which is to say now for 100 years. Welsh Interval at Penmon Point. The lighthouse tolls its warning bell, tolls and tolls again in Easter's wake. Cold easterlies off the mountains bite, but as the grey generations, menfolk tonsured by time, leave their cars and take a turn along the shingles limestone glare in knifing ozone, with more than half a mind on lunch. What is it about an island scene that meets our longing for completion. Across the waves, the bell carries time to its mark and back again, as it has done as many times as there are pebbles here, or more, night and day, star for star, pulsing of perils and mortality. It asks, perhaps, who's counting to admonish us, and who hears, and what do we hear? Not a bell, but Egwyl, a Welsh interval, the voice of silence, a Zen koan, answer and no answer, time held in mid-air, clang, a sound both still and silent, clang, a marine and monkish moment, speaking to what we never had, a life at sea, a life of prayer in a language we can only hear, not comprehend. Just as unoccupied, the Coast Guard cottages appear to stare at Puffin Island, as if waiting for something to happen. The next little poem, Corncrake, carries a lot of freight for me. It is an Ilish War poem. It was originally called Riddle, after the Anglo-Saxon example, which I first came upon in Richard Hamer's book of translations from the Anglo-Saxon. But I've since blown my cover and undone the riddle. There are a few corncrakes in my poems. They are, of course, figures of loss. The corncrake also provided the imprimatur of my Carcanet Press, so it is materially important too. Corncrake or landrail, cracks, cracks. Spring slips him in through a gap in a stone wall, a secret agent, bargaining with the underworld against sleep, a bomb with a slow time fuse, an old man winding all our clocks on and back. Aaron Keening's the next poem. It's, I suppose, a kind of elegy, memorial poem to a friend of mine, Tom Hernan, whom I got to know closely and well when I lived on Inishmore. He figures in my Lilliput Press memoir on Aaron Keening as the character Gregory. Tom was almost fanatical about working his land. He worked all the time from dawn to dusk, day in and out, apart from Sunday. Lived a truly hard, Devalerian life. But once a month, he had a Tuesday off to collect the dole. His mother said he had to do this on account of the superannuation, that is, a pension. And also, just in case any work was brought to the island, he would be eligible for it, for having signed on. Though, as she said, if it was brought, Tom would be too busy to do it. The Welsh word Cynefin that Alan has introduced you to characterizes Tom Hernan's life as no other that I know. It's a very rare phenomenon now, at least. Aaron Keening, in memory of Tom Hernan, died 17 November 2009, at 87. My friend sent me a photo of his coffin lying in state at Ornacht with his cap on. People from the islands and two sisters from America, the whole island, came to pay their last respects. I should have joined them, sent regrets, but they barely waited, and he was in the airy ground the moment gone. I can see them, though, in that wake of rain and sudden break and gash of sun, open to order over the graveyard, and a huge crowd of mourners gathered above the bay at Kilmurry, where the hero of my hour lived and died. I was 2 weeks in at this anniversary, my 41st, the Tuesday to the day he breathed his last, the dole day for irony. His only holiday, his mother said. And now I'm going to read a short poem called Key. Now, it needs no introduction, it's very short, isn't it? But I will draw your attention with regard to all the short poems that I have, because I do a few of them, to John Berryman, who said, "The only happy people in the world are those who do not have to write long poems." So ergo, I am a happy person, perhaps. Key. I wait at the key, and the key waits. There's many a thing more lasting than a person, I hear it say, but no great length. And again, a short poem, Corncrake again. Stitching along unseen, the invisible mender of our broken nature between now and then. And then a poem, The Sea Goes All the Way Round the Island. This derives, this bull, as it were, derives from Tim Robinson's study, Ilishmore, Stones of Arran. The sea goes all the way round the island, for they were long days, though short, and short nights, though winter long, rising before day into the deep thought that is being, undistracted, like a song in its tune, seamlessly one and the same. As the man said, the sea goes all the way round the island. But here too, like a half rhyme, home and home, headway and tideway, between compass point and landmark, asymmetric revelation does its work and rounds the mind for another day. Then the next poem is Meanwhile. This is about life before the digital era, when time and distance enjoyed and endured a different relationship, as did we all. It prompts me to remember lines from T.S. Eliot's first chorus from The Rock. Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? Meanwhile, now don't roll your eyes when I say it wasn't always so. But meanwhile, once when starved of news, subsisting on thin air of memories, it prayed, it thought of you more than you could know. It lay awake listening to the gale and what the shipping forecast had to say. It read your letter over and over and went about taking the chill off your room with a gas fire and a colour cylinder, aired bed linen fussed and cleaned. It lamented the squalling rain at the window and stared minutes on end into the grey where spume and rain dashed together along the cliffs, the sea's first obstacle between here and America. It remembered the day you left and wondered where you are now, and knew too well how long it was since your last visit. It took its time and busied itself to make time fly, until at last postmistress came over with a message. You were aiming for the longer bee sailing on Thursday. The next poem is called Critique of Judgment. And I'm reading this one from my wife, Diana, a keen landscape painter and brilliant pastelist. It came to me on Anglesey, looking across the Menai Strait towards the Carcanet range of mountains, the range that contains the Lake Dillon, on a fine day of sunlight and hazy gauze. After I'd written it, I realized that somewhere in the back of my head was a poem called Green Categories by R.S. Thomas, which has the pathetic opening line, "You never heard of Kant, did you, brother?" Critique of judgment. And suddenly the view looks as though an artist has been busy with her pastels, blunting the mountains and the hills with mist of cloud and blue-green shadow, things for which God knows I'm a soft touch. No matter, I can see through the gauze to nature red in teeth and claws, and hardship far beyond her crayon's reach. This is what I call visionary appearance, to save me from the worst when I most need it, as when at any hour of day or night I wake before pure reason's incoherence. As is the next poem, and it is a COVID era poem. As on the night before a new adventure, when what you've planned might not become the future, and sleep's as broken as a choppy sea, and waiting makes the clock crawl round, slower than Zeno's progress to infinity, his hands going down and up again. As reports come in that a father and son are missing, presumed drowned, and all sailings are cancelled until further notice. As when you open in parenthesis, as if what's to come might ever end and be lifted away or framed like a picture, summed up by a title and a fixed signature. As you consider your options and resort to plan B, as the couple cancel their honeymoon, as the daughter from Rhode Island, having just missed her mother's funeral, finds herself grieving between the meanings of terminal. As you sit elbows on knees staring at your feet, waiting and staring for as long as forever, or pace up and down, trying to make sense of what's happening with one eye on the weather and an ear to what they're saying about the prognosis and the latest turn of events, as one damn thing leads to another, and nothing changes or even relents. Why not consider the lilies of the field for once? Think what it means to have time on your hands. Time, if not space, to dwell, to see what it means simply to be at the beck of no one's commands, to be stuck ashore, yet all at sea. Didn't you always want to break free? Haven't we all heard you cry, if only? Well, now's the time to give only a try, because only is here. I'm feeling lonely. And the next poem is called Lunch with Seamus. It seems self-serving in a way to read such a poem, but several people have asked me to do so. I read it and wrote it, I suppose, with my publisher's hat on. Seamus Heaney was a tremendous supporter of my press and of my magazine, Archipelago, and I published a little pamphlet by him called A Shiver, and we had a launch, not a Zoom launch, and not a very big launch, just two people having lunch together in London. And this is what this poem tells the story of. Lunch with Seamus. I saw him hurry by a hotel window where I sat nursing time over a steadying glass before I went along to keep our assignation at Doyle's, a few yards away. Bloomsbury seemed to suit him, and I thought as I thought of McNeillie in October and said to myself, this is a life. Not our first time, but first time tete-a-tete, and both of us, I think, uncertain how lunch might pass chez Gerard, the occasion to mark his pamphlet, The Shiver. I'll tell you now, we got on like a house on fire, a turf fire too, burning underground, through worlds in common, for mine much second hand, from my father's time, with North Clitto steading called to mind, the hill head, the smithy, the farmhouse, a common universe slowly synchronizing, helped by a bottle he paused to praise. Reckless now, I asked, would he read a new poem I'd done, set by the Swilly? Slower, he smiled, when slowly he'd finished, a slow air. Now animated, he leaned closer and said intimately, as if in confession, this is what I like. This is how it used to be. Usually now, if I go to lunch like this, they sit silent, waiting for the oracle to speak. I reined myself in now, he had his head. I got the Nobel Prize too soon, he said. It nearly did for me. You know, the fame. It stops the clock and steals your time. Shall I say, it made the electric light flicker? As if on cue, a young man with a piece of paper rose from a table nearby to beg an autograph. I watched him sign. His hand at once caught my eye. I mean the hand itself, a small hand for a big mind, born for the pen, unbruised by past spadework or other labour. By now it was fast approaching 4, and with the bit between my teeth, I offered to take him fishing. He looked at me as if in pity. You know, I never did it, but only saw it done. Eye to eye we met, and his canny look made me think again the nature of the man. I felt as if sobered into reality by the redress of poetry. What might be done by merely seeing things, if you are Seamus Heaney. Now the place was empty but for us, and the waiters wanted us gone. We parted, and I watched him disappear, as if I dreamt the whole affair, but knowing I hadn't. I'd seen the man. This is the one you've all been waiting for. This is the last poem I read. It's inspired by an extravaganza by Vladimir Holan, the great Czech poet, a Rilke scholar, who wrote a wonderful poem called A Night with Hamlet. Holan spent many, many years under house arrest in the Soviet era, confined to an island in the Vltava River. His life was very, 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 very hard. Now, this poem comes with an epigraph from Yeats's poem, The Statues, a poem which also mentions Hamlet. Hamlet thin from eating flies. So here we go, this is the last one. A night on the heath. What stalked through the post office? The weather's foul again, ripping through the unnameable archipelago. And here am I, fumbling with truth, longing to unbutton, like Vladimir Holan, that time he drank Hamlet under the table, while history went falsely drawn past his window like a Vltava river in a flood. Who am I, wandering the night, buttonholing ghosts, demanding to know what is the state without love, living death? Cases alter circumstances, but power's no ghost, as Hamlet learnt, struggling between past and present, old and new, the lot of all poets. Losers outnumber victors, just as the dead form the majority. Tell me what that might mean for democracy. A promotion for historians, a lifeline for gravediggers. It's not so much who comes out on top as how. When at last I found him, he said, Whenever they tell me it's all about family, I laugh. Life's not short enough for that to hold its ground. Ask Hamlet. And he came nowhere close at about the age of Christ. The kingdoms would tear themselves apart, but lack boats or muscle. The powers pump up the volume on God Save the Queen. Fortinbras grinds his teeth. I wait for the sorting office to redirect me to the Republic. There now, and I will add, having looked at my collected poems, the other epigraph that I have from the Spanish poet Luis Rosales. Knowing I have never erred in anything, but in the things that have mattered to me most. There we are. Thank you all very much. I don't know what happens next, but I think, oh, Alan comes along. Yes?
Yes.
Good. Thank you.
Wow. That was wonderful. Moran Tang. Moran Tang. Thank you very much, Andrew. That was fabulous. There was so much, such richness. Where to begin? How to begin to respond? If you have questions, if you put them in the chat or in the question and answer box, I'll review those in a moment. But I want to again kind of chairperson's privilege. It was just that sense of the recurring presence of the corncrake. I've seen a corncrake. I saw a corncrake once, one corncrake, on the Isle of Tiree. I was with my Uncle Mac, and we spent quite a bit of time driving very, very slowly on very, very small, narrow roads that were very flat island. And he would have his comb and just run it on the open window edge and wait. It took a long time. We could hear them, but they were we hoped that they would respond to the sound. And then one did. We were just sitting in the car and we saw it just exactly as you describe in the poem, coming through the stone, the dry stone dike through the wall on the road, and then it was off, and that was it. Yeah. And it was just that sense of what I was taking in as you were reading those poems was that, on the one hand, that kind of the oceans that were rising and falling in some of those poems, the sense of seeing the coast and the oceans and the islands, almost as if no people had ever been there. That sense of what that world was, is. And then these darts of perception, these single things like the wee corncrake itself, just something that ripples along that's there, that's present. And it's so rich and so multitudinous, and so many people actually inhabiting these poems, and that sense of civility and relationship and particularity that comes through in them, very beautifully gauged and described and evoked in poem after poem. And there's so much. I just wanted to ask to open the conversation maybe by asking the most elementary of questions about, and just to say, what do you think? How would you respond to the question? What do you think has been the greatest influence on your work?
Right. Now, I think it's non-literary to begin with. I think it is geographical. It is about place. It is about a world, that world I've described, where I spent my apprenticeship as a fly fisherman. That's the thing that determined me in many ways, and compounded with it, I suppose, is the fact that I was born and brought up in Wales, which is a marvelous privilege. Wonderful people that gave me a love for ordinariness and for the folk and for place and that kind of thing. And so when I went off to live on Inishmore, I was really trying to prolong that and extend it and enrich it in a society that was, well, like all small island societies, much in a way simpler, but always as complicated as any other society. And in that, I think now, and I didn't think of that then because I don't think she'd use the term, but I think of Fiona Stafford's idea of local truth. that appeals to me. The idea that life is just as important and dramatic and trying away from the metropolis as anywhere else. Hardy was a great expert on all that, wasn't he? But I think Fiona's writings in that way subsequently I commissioned that book from her and published it, but it's been very, very helpful to me and inspirational. So there's that, and then influence. Well, literary influence. I don't know what that is. I think you think of anxiety of influence, and you think of petty theft, petty thievery, grand larceny, all those things. But I think they are more or less irrelevant. I think of influence as aspirational. I think that you aspire to emulate the works of great people. And for me, I can't get away from the importance to me of many of these are Carcanet authors too, which ought to bring a great round of applause. The Scottish Macras, the people associated with Hugh McDermid really get me. That's not sentimental. It is because of their range, I think, and the nature of their engagement with language and place and the folk. And so I find that their ambition, they're not tied into the small lyric cry. They are out there doing many different and difficult things, and they don't have an equivalent anywhere else. They were an amazing moment. And so I would say, for example, Hugh McDermid has been very influential upon me, but in that large sense of trying to emulate somebody's example. And another poet, which I don't think many people in England will ever have heard of, but a great and an amazing poet called George Campbell Hay. Was very important to me, an archipelagic poet, a poet of the sea, a poet of fishing. But you wouldn't say, reading my poems, oh, yeah, that comes from there, except that I do have a tribute poem to Hay. I have one, A Night on Wolsey to Hugh McDermid. That also grew out of the example of Vladimir Holan. So that's how I would say it. That first and foremost, it's a groundedness in place, in a particular place, in a particular kind of place, a wilderness place, I think. Time alone will tell has a marvelous double meaning. Time alone, for me, solitariness, it's like a drug. I do have to peel off occasionally and be on my own and be uncomfortable in a miserable, wild environment. And if I don't feel that I'm struggling, I'm not happy.
Well, there's nothing like it. I mean, if you're standing on I think McDermid actually has a poem about standing on a cliff top where the wind is so severe, and you are alone with all of that in front of you and running through you, running past you, and
yes,
you measure whatever it is that's measurable against it, and I share with you that sense that Fiona Stafford's book, the Province of Poetry, and that sense of that she comes with there, beautifully expressed, about the foundations that poetry and great art really needs secure real foundations to take off from, to begin to elaborate from.
yes.
But the sense also, there's really good questions coming up in the chat box. That sense of, and it does tie back to McDermid and to George Campbell Hay about a question of language. And we have a question here from Taylor Strickland. So the question about your perspective as an English language observer of certain subjects, like Inishmore, but then also utilizing the Welsh language in such a way, so that if I can put that together with a question, an observation that's come in from Kirsty Gunn, and Kirsty is talking about a word I used there particularly called the word intrinsic, and it's there, I think, going right back to Carnarvon, Glost, that sense of something intrinsic about your sense of home or homeland or habitation. And it's a habitation in language as well as in place. And because of the reality of the place that you have in so many poems, and that sense of isolation and encounter with that place, it puts a particular pressure on, or edge, gives an edge to the language, whether it's English or however it's used, but it's not, there's something about it that's not relaxed in the way that you might say particular authors of English are. There's something more edged about it, perhaps. Do you want to maybe
I'll try. Certainly, I'm not urbane. I'm not polished, and I don't want to be. I do regard myself in some measure as a primitive. That's probably an exaggeration and not entirely accurate. But I have a belief that, my family was Welsh, but we grew up in a very Welsh community. And so I heard Welsh and had Welsh in English, as it were, the inflection of English by Welsh people, the rhythm, the noise, the difference that there's in it. It's the same thing, very marked, of course, in Ireland. And I think then there's a certain kind of odd transition there between the Cynefin, what words mean and how you use them, and that sort of perhaps it seeps into the deliberation, all those things, Carcanet, and also I would say that Hopkins is very much alive in my formation. I like the sprung language, and that seems to be naturally part of it, and the kind of I like the idea of a more intensified language, and I think that is as if English isn't my cradle language, but of course it is. But all the time along the way in the background is this Welsh noise, this Welsh way of saying things, which when I lived on Inishmore, I'm quite kind of like a minor bird. I adapt quickly to the way people speak in other places. So when my father, much against my wishes, came to visit me on Inishmore, he said to me, you sound just like these people. And so I think I caught the way they spoke English, and that was helpful in writing my book. I had the language they had, the English language they used. So I don't know how one brings that to a close, but yes, I don't like language that hasn't got some kind of extra noise to it.
Well, I think it's to do with the music of it. It's to do with in a way that's a banal comment, really, but it's but perhaps not. Perhaps not. It's musical in the sense of you distinguish between particular bird songs. They're not one thing. They're very, very subtle, and the gradations are very careful. And if you listen, you have to listen hard. But when you make the distinctions, those distinctions are very keen. And this is something that I think goes on in the poems, that the language of the poems actually presents English in a way which is filtered or edged by that sense of distinction between languages, whether it's Gaelic or Scots Gaelic or Irish Gaelic or Welsh, or how these are related to each other. Going back to what I said at the beginning about one nation is really not enough, because you need to put it alongside or see it from the perspective of others, and I think that's part of the story. The other thing I was going to ask, sorry, on you go.
No,
It was just to take that maybe a wee bit further in the sense of movement, because you have movement in the poems it's very varied. So you have that wonderful sense of sitting at the table with Seamus Heaney, and that sense of conviviality, and of that almost that the sense that you get in Burns's Tam O'Shanter, where Tam is planted and he's sitting there, he's there. And you're there having that lunch and having that conversation very sensitively, but also enjoying it for its sensual appetite. But at the same time, there's poems of movement where you're sailing, where you're actually on the sea.
Yes.
There are poems of walking and of observation, of traveling on the land. I guess I'd ask simply as a kind of curiosity about partly understanding how different languages work in George Campbell Hayes' poetry, but also thinking of how his poetry embodies and occupies those different senses of movement, whether it's on a boat or whether it's with the fishermen or whether it's on land.
Yes. Well, yes, well, of course, he moved in all kinds of directions and between many languages. I mean, the man was a language genius. I mean, he had more languages than he could write poems in Welsh, French, I think Norwegian. I don't know, any language you like. He was a man to whom languages adhered, and so reading him. And reading his Gaelic poems in their English translations in that great, big, wonderful collected poems, that also fascinates me and holds me, and I think washes back at me. I think people ought to know much more about this man than they do. I think even in Scotland, he's slightly on the outside. I mean, he's not one of the figures in Sandy's great portrait of the Machas. The guys who MacDermot knew. He should have been there.
Aye. He's still, well, there are so many of these poets that we're still catching up with. And again, as you say, Carcanet is to be congratulated on making them available in ways that they weren't before. Amazing
achievement. And I feel a great honor to be there, you know, as a Mac among them. You know, that's really very, very special for me to feel.
Well, we'll be infiltrating you into our courses in Scottish literature then.
Well, I think so.
We can be accommodative.
In vast quantities. I think the one thing about making a selection, I found it very difficult because I've written, I mean, I felt I didn't represent my involvement with the sea. I didn't represent the idea of traveling in the wilderness, largely because those are quite long poems and they don't extract well. And so I left a whole part of me out of it altogether. You were talking about that in a way, but it's in the book, but it wasn't in my selection. I didn't know what to do. It's a very difficult thing. And I'm grateful for your coaching and also Fiona's coaching towards you know, what I should read. But in the end, and also my friend Richard Burton, who gave me a lovely set of suggestions. But in the end, I just had to walk away from those people I'd asked very kindly.
There's always got to be a line drawn. As, you know, the line has to be drawn somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm aware of time, and I'm aware of the time, the enemy.
Time, the enemy.
This is a conversation that will carry on, Andrew. But what you've just said prompts me to remark that what we've heard this evening from Andrew and these fantastic readings, that selection of poems is very representative, but it's not at all representative of the whole book. There is so much more in it. It's a fantastically rich and varied collection. And perhaps to bring us to a conclusion, because I see we really are coming out of time, perhaps we could go to just one final aphoristic little poem, which I picked, I mentioned to you the other day, which I thought was a very succinct way of concluding. And I'll just say thank you to you. Well, thank you first to everybody who's been here. And thank you for the questions that have come in the comments. And Andrew, you'll be able to see these directly and see how many people are sending you salutations and high praise. But I'll hand it over to you to have the last word with
right. Now, bye. Thank you ever so much. I'll talk to you later. Now, this is a tiny poem. John Merriman couldn't have written it at all, I don't think. It comes from a sequence of poems called Arboretum, which is about trees and various forms of vegetation and plants. And this one is very, 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 very useful. It's called Ivy. Be silent, unless you have something better than silence to say.
Moran Tang, thank you so much.
Thank you all, ever so much.
Thank Thank you both so much. It's been a really, really lovely reading. Thank you, Alan, for hosting, and thank you so much, Andrew, for reading and for answering those questions, and congratulations on your new book. Thank you guys all for being here. It's been a real pleasure. It was great to see your messages in the chat and in the question box. I did put the link and the discount code in the chat for you so you can get your copy of the book. It'll also come as an automatic email from Zoom tomorrow, so check your inbox and go and buy loads of copies of the book, please. We really want you to do that. If you have any problems getting that email or getting the discount code, just get in touch with us and we'll do everything we can to help you. So finally, please join us again next week. We're launching a debut collection that time from Stav Poleg. He'll be joined by Lisa Kelly. That's in the chat for you too, and all the details are on the website. So that's everything from us this evening. Congratulations again, Andrew, and thank you both for a wonderful evening. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very, very much.